Welcome back to Seek Strength and welcome back to a very cold studio on Seekistan. The national coal station has in fact run out of coal due to blockades. So Darius, for some reason, just took off all his clothes. And I can see the goosebumps on your... Did you not want to wear your gangster jacket?
I just feel like that jacket makes me look like I should be dealing drugs on a corner.
It does. It actually does, yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I just don't know if people
It's not
take me
very
seriously.
presentable.
No, people won't take me seriously in that. So, we're back with another All Blacks S&C Coaches React. This was probably one of our first videos that went pretty big. Got close to 100k, I think, just over 2 years ago. And
Right in the middle of COVID as well.
right in the middle, smack bang in COVID. So to be honest, the reason we do the All Blacks so much is they're essentially the only rugby team that put up S&C work. Sometimes individual players put up S&C work and it's frightening, and so we just don't do it.
Makes me sad on the inside.
It's upsetting to do, so it's not really, as you know, with the reaction stuff we like to do, we always like to do the good stuff, mostly good stuff, so we can point out the best things to do rather than ragging on people, as you know. So it's the better athletes, so you can learn the right stuff to do. Usually what's more important is you do more of the right stuff, and if you do enough of the right stuff, it will outweigh to a certain extent the dumb stuff people do in their training. And so, to be fair to the All Blacks, they routinely do mostly good stuff, and so that's why we're pretty happy to do them for the rugby. We don't really like to rag majorly unless it's MMA, and then we will.
In which case, the proverbial gloves are off.
So this is a strength and power session for the All Blacks. Now, you might think, this little frame, we can skip past this, but no. There's so much happening in this initial frame. Mostly what I want to talk about is the single leg Bosu ball squats.
It feels like an episode of Where's Wally?
Yeah.
Where's Waldo if you live in the States?
Where's Aaron Smith?
There's a lot going on here. Sled pushes, some people are doing power cleans, some people are doing deadlifts, I think. And then we've got some single leg balance work on like Bosu ball, stroke, tires, stroke, baby trampolines.
I want to zoom in, proverbially and both hopefully editorially via Alex, just zoom in on this guy doing the single leg Bosu ball squats, and hopefully there's some kind of sound effect there. So the stability and balance training is quite interesting because unfortunately a lot of them get conflated together, but they're a little bit distinct in terms of like when you're looking for outcomes. So if we're looking for stability training, it doesn't make sense for a rugby player to do stability training on a Bosu ball or a balance board or something like that. It might make a small amount of sense if they're doing rehab, and in certain scenarios it does seem to be useful. But if the bulk of their ability to resist blows and I nearly said concussions, resist forces from the outside or tackles, doing that on the ground with weights or simply practicing tackles or increasing your max force production makes much more sense. But balance training shouldn't be thrown into the same bag of rubbish with stability training when it comes to Bosu balls and stuff. Balance training is very useful. Vast majority of field sports require a lot of balance under speed, under a lot of stress, and training your balance is quite useful. So if this is what they're doing here in this scenario, that does make sense. It is a useful aspect or modality or skill to train for an athlete. It's very low fatigue. I'm going to say it's essentially zero fatigue.
Yeah, you want to be doing a lot of single leg balance work to accumulate training volume from it.
There's no negatives, essentially. There's no negative compensatory movements, really, when you're just training balance like this. The only way would be essentially if someone is trying to get him to practice throwing a ball while single leg on a Bosu, but we don't see that. And you'd want to do a lot of repetitions to really outweigh the negative and outweigh the positive, the years of actually good movements he's doing. So when you're just doing general balance training, single leg stuff, closing your eyes, standing in different positions, I think that is quite valuable for athletes. It's zero cost and it does have some benefit, and in reality you're going to get no negatives from it, even if it doesn't have a benefit.
Yeah, I think where you will see negatives, if you see someone doing something like this and maybe they're doing like a split squat where their front leg's on an unstable surface and they're really loading that, and it's clear that they're trying to build some sort of strength or build some sort of increase in power output when they're in that unstable, is it unstable? unstable position, that's where you get some negatives. That's where you get that kind of neural inhibition of those muscle contractions. That's what you don't want. In cases like this, though, when it's just kind of somebody standing there, most rugby players, particularly rugby players who've played enough to be professional, will have had an ankle injury or two along the way. It's very, very likely you're going to just be building up some positive proprioception, or kind of increasing your total vocabulary of proprioception through the ankle there.
Is the tyrant unstable or is he unstable? So moving on, then we've got some power snatches. We go for power snatch from the floor here. As was very common with All Blacks, the team changes from video to video with the entire roster except for Aaron Smith, who's always there for some reason.
Power snatches like this. So I'm not sure if this is the session where it's the end of August. Mm-hmm. If this is the end of August, it's likely that it's 2 or 3 days following the game. What's saying here is against South Africa. Sorry, that's incorrect.
That was the October game, isn't
it? That's next year.
Wasn't the one they lost to Ireland, was it twice? Was it that one?
No, it's not that one.
It wasn't that one, okay.
So if it is the one at the end of August, they're like in camp, in prep for their kind of autumn international, or sorry, not autumn internationals, but against their first game against Australia. So that game will be the end of September. So they're around a month out from their first kind of proper international test here. So it is interesting to see the inclusion of power snatches, or just normal snatches, or snatches in general. Obviously, we've talked about the use of the Olympic lifts for professional field athletes a lot on this channel. And there's something where, like, in a case like this where you have a mix of abilities across the team, so some people might be very comfortable with the Olympic lifts, some people may not be so comfortable with the Olympic lifts, depending on their kind of academy they were brought up in, depending on how much S&C work they did with coaches as they were developing, and depending on which club they play with now. Usually we see this level of kind of pick and mix when they're not so close to games. Mm-hmm. So certainly you wouldn't see this when they're kind of 2 or 3 weeks out, where players will just get to kind of go away and do power snatches. But in this case, this might be their first gym session in their kind of 5-week long camp. You don't really know what the overall program looks like, but it's interesting to see some power snatches in there.
The mural on the background is very cool.
Yeah.
So when it comes to power snatches and power cleans, the effect in your training for sports athletes, they're essentially the same if you can do both of those to similar weights. Generally, you want to be hitting kind of just a bit below body weight or at body weight for the power cleans to be seeing most of the effect, and that seems to be what a lot of the literature suggests. In general, though, like if you get an athlete who can power clean 160 with rudimentary training, you should let them do that, essentially. Like if they can get stronger, this is what we're kind of talking about with the throwers. There is a point of diminishing returns, but it's hard to deny if in an off season, like if it's someone like Daniel Stahl or Stell, someone corrected me, but if you can get to a place where you can move 300 kilos as fast as another athlete might move 200 kilos, it's kind of hard to deny the benefits of that within reason, assuming it's not negatively affecting your sport-specific activity. Generally, why we don't like power snatches, and specifically for rugby players, is rugby players experience a lot of things known as stingers. And
they sure do.
By all accounts, are very painful. So if we look at the fatigue or the negatives from power snatches here, you're just going to see a lot of shoulder pain. Now, if someone can do them with the same weights, then there's kind of no reason not to let them do them. But in general, power cleans are the much safer option, much lower on the fatigue to kind of benefit or negatives to benefit scale. And generally, power cleans are the much easier option to learn, much more consistent, require less warm-up, can be done in a shorter period of time, can be done with heavier weights, can likely be done a lot faster with these heavier weights. And so it's just not that the power snatch wouldn't work, it's just that it doesn't really work in reality when you put it into the kind of the simulation of actual thing.
What stingers are like a colloquial term for an acute shoulder injury that just kind of knocks you down, basically. So usually it's accompanied by some sort of muscular damage around the shoulder. They're kind of seen as an injury. You'll just get a bit of spray on your shoulder and continue on playing. If it's a bad stinger, you might have some sort of minor subluxation, so some sort of minor dislocation of the shoulder, and it will go back in itself. Oftentimes stingers also have some sort of mid-spine element to them, where somebody might get a little crack in their upper or mid-back as they get a stinger, but it's almost always tackle, ruck or maul related, but very, very common in rugby.
Is absolutely detrimental for overhead mobility, in case you're wondering.
I would say if you've enough mobility to go overhead, then you're at risk of increased stingers.
You haven't had enough rugby played if you can go overhead with a snatch. It's just unusual,
Yeah.
especially for a lad of this size.
Yeah.
But then moving on to, look, they're half squats, and I'd say they're probably intentionally half squats. And we've talked about this a lot in relation to athletes. We talked about it in relation to rugby. We've talked in relation to throwers and box squats. And for power athletes, there's kind of two different things you'll be looking at here. And the first one is for power production, and it's essentially heavy weight fast, and you can move heavier weights faster if you cut your depth, and there seems to be a lot of benefit to that in relation to their power production. However, on the other side of that coin, I think there's a lot of benefits for a lot of athletes, specifically rugby players, if they also do full depth squats as deep as they can manage in good positions, because there's a lot of benefits to that. So in terms of the full range of motion you get when you are training those particular muscle groups, there's a place for both of those in training. It doesn't have to be an either or scenario, but you are losing out on some of the benefits of a full depth squat in terms of your tendons and ligaments, their elasticity, their ability to withstand forces through full range of motion, because you could easily end up in those full range of motion in any number of scenarios when playing rugby. Obviously, it's a very athletic sport. It requires a lot of whole body commitment, to say the least, and a heavy high bar squat, I think, can train these resilience of these particular muscle groups quite well, especially if they're done in a correct place in the off season.
Yeah, there's two kind of particular things that come to mind with that. So when you look at the full depth squat and the use of full depth squat, obviously a lot of teams have their kind of own thoughts on that. But when you look at certain injuries and certain kind of more famous injuries you might be aware of, if you look at the injury that retired Paul O'Connell from professional rugby, you saw him over the top of ruck getting hit in a non-orthodox way, and then suddenly he goes into an extreme range of hip flexion and he gets an avulsion fracture on his hamstring and finishes his rugby career. Like, this is the kind of range of motion that Garth is talking about there. And people oftentimes, you'll hear, particularly in track and field, you'll hear people saying, like, when is my knee ever going to come up past the level of my hip? Like, that never ever happens. In sports like rugby, where the contacts are uncontrollable, you're going to be in an awful lot of them, and most of the time your landing from a contact or your ability to recover from that contact will directly influence whether you'll have a long-term injury or you mightn't be injured at all. The full depth squat is incredibly useful. It's probably not the tool you'll use for like the maximum power output stuff, but it's certainly the tool you'll use to make your hips, knees, ankles and back very, very strong.
Mm-hmm. As we see with all of these All Blacks training videos, there's always some kind of accelerometer or bar velocity measuring tool on the bar.
The second thing I meant to say about the full depth squatting is that, so anybody who's been in S&C for kind of 10 years or more will be familiar with the name Kelly Starrett, who did a lot of the mobility work, a doctor of physiotherapy based out of San Francisco. Kelly Starrett worked with Arsenal Football Club for a season on their injury prehab and rehab work, was being flown out semi-regularly, if I understand correctly, and one of his main points in his contract with Arsenal were that they would squat to full depth once a week. That was that was one of his main things he just had to have. But
they were very resilient of that, or they're very
resistant.
They weren't super keen on letting him do that with them. Moving on, we just have a trap bar, and I really like the way they loaded this. So it's a trap bar, but with the back portion of the trap bar missing, or hex bar, whatever you want to call it, and he's just loading the split squats like that. And actually really like that, because loading split squats from the back can be a little bit awkward. Holding dumbbells heavy enough eventually hits a point of diminishing returns. It gets very difficult to hold them that heavy when you want to load them enough for split squats. So loading them like this is actually quite a smart way of doing that. I kind of like it.
It's just a lot easier as well to have that weight lower down. Mm-hmm. Like if you have a bar up on your back and that weight is up very, very high, like higher than your center of gravity, rather than it's like someone walking across a tightrope holding one of those big long poles, to drop their center of gravity. This just makes those split squats, you can generate a lot more force with a lot better technique.
Moving on then, we have some very, very good power cleans. These are, people ask us a lot, and someone literally just asked us today actually in our Facebook group, in relation to the kind of technique you want to see when it comes to athletes versus power clean versus when you're doing power cleans for weightlifting. So If you look at weightlifters, they're going to do a style of power clean that lets them catch that power clean into the full depth clean if it goes wrong in a very seamless and very simple fashion. When it comes to athletes doing power cleans, the way we want to see it is very, very simple. It's what's the safest manner they can get their barbell to their shoulder. That's the primary concern. So we're not starfishing. We're not catching a barbell down here. We're not going to a weight where they're likely to have to end up in a full squat because it's unlikely they'll have the ability to do that. You're going for weights that are safe, and heavy weights are for fast, essentially. The two things is all you're looking for. Heavy weights as fast as possible, so certain weight that allows you to move something fast repeatedly at a heavy enough weight to have a meaningful effect while also having it safe. And that's generally a very simple power clean. You can get quite a nice power clean for athletes following those kind of basic rules for that.
Yeah, very nice rack position there as well, which we talked about overhead positions not being great in rugby players. Rack positions require a lot of external rotation of the shoulder. Very nice.
I think of all the rugby teams you're going to see at the moment, the All Blacks are most likely to have some rack position in terms of they're the smallest. Smaller side. Not to suggest that they're a small team, but
I don't think you'll see too many South African forwards racking a barbell well.
Wouldn't see much of the French league racking a barbell either, I'd say, or half of the Irish team racking a barbell either. So then we have, it's actually something you don't see a lot, is rugby players doing deadlifts, or professional rugby players doing a lot of deadlifts.
One thing that stands out massively for me on that deadlift is he looks to his left hand side every time, which really aggravates me. It's a massive pet peeve. It comes from a few different areas. A lot of the time people learn to deadlift by looking in a mirror, or they'll look at the plates moving off the floor and get some sort of visual feedback and not rely on proprioceptive feedback for that. A lot of the time a coach will stand at 45 degrees and give active cueing to an athlete as they're deadlifting, which causes the head to move like that. No, we never, ever, ever want that. Full stop. I don't care if you're in a non-ideal head position. You might be looking straight down. You might be looking straight up. Both of those are non-ideal positions. It's nowhere near as non-ideal as that kind of head tilt over to the side is.
So then we have trap bar deadlifts. Now, there's a funny thing here happening. So you can see the bar velocity meter, or the kind of accelerometer, whatever brand of machine it is. So essentially you have is the athlete knows he's been recorded. So we're kind of getting an interference effect here, an observation effect, that the observation of the experiment is changing the results slightly. So you'll see he's trying to move the barbell as fast as possible on the way up, but also what he's also doing is smashing the barbell down when he's doing the eccentric. So he's going down as fast as possible, which isn't really ideal. It's of no benefit and could open you up to inconsistency in technique and potentially maybe increases possibility of injury while doing them. It's certainly not increasing the quality of the lift. So if we're smashing the barbell down and trying to change the direction, it's certainly not going to allow you the chance to set up correctly for each reps. They're not going to be as consistent as possible, and ironically then you're not going to get probably as fast as reps. While this might feel a lot faster, I think it's just kind of funny, the fact that because they're observing him for his speed, he's overcompensating and not actually getting any faster as well on top of that.
To be honest, anytime I've seen a group of athletes, whether it's on a team or whether it's in a testing environment, do anything with like one of those linear force transducers, that's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
They'll either bring the bar down onto their chest really fast for the bench, or else they'll come up to the top and pop back down really fast. It's just it's very much the nature of the game.
So we have Aaron Smith doing some power cleans as well. Very passable, great rack position. So same objects apply. He looks to be squatting a lot deeper, so I hate when people unrack the barbell at the top where they pop up so much.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing where people feel fast when they're doing that, and you're not doing anything by letting the bar hop back off your back. You know, all you're doing there is you're just locking out the squat and popping your hips back a small bit, and it looks like the bar is popped off a lot. So it's really not beneficial in any way. Even if you were a thrower and you're maximally squatting for as much speed as you possibly can, there's no benefit to doing it. Like, there's definitely a negative to it because the barbell sits in a slightly different position. You're trying to stabilize a dynamic load then as you sit down for your next rep. It's just non-ideal. And
you're also smashing your vertebrae with
a
heavy barbell. Now, the only thing with the throwers is they might accidentally power jerk it if they do that. So here we have split squats on that thing we saw Forstmann, the German cyclist, on this roller, and I really don't like it. I think it's you're asking for issues. We also have seen band resisted split squats. an interesting choice.
I think what you could be seeing with band resisted versus non-band resisted for some other players is if somebody's coming back for an injury or they're particularly weak in a certain area, it might just be that they're able to take that resistance at the top, like in the top upper portion of the rep, but maybe he's coming back from some sort of injury and the bottom portion, just that very bottom of the range of motion, isn't there.
Then again, very good power cleans. I think of all the athletes of any team I've seen are probably individuals outside of maybe throwers. These are probably some of the most technically good power cleans.
I do know the facilities manager is probably looking at those bars being dropped on the AstroTurf and having a hernia.
Do you know what? Those bars don't look great either. Again, trap bar deadlifts. Not going to be loading these up massively. Okay, here we got those B stance deadliftings.
Yeah.
So heavy prowler pushes. Obviously great exercise for any of the backs.
100%, yeah.
I'm a big fan of those for conditioning. If you can, it's just quite hard. You don't see a lot of prowlers anymore. So elite FDS used to be huge, and Jen Mennery's talk about them. You could get them everywhere, and I actually made one, or my father made one for me when I was like 16. But they're a great exercise.
Phenomenal.
It's the prowler in particular. I prefer those than sled dragging or sled pulling.
Yeah. I think as well for something like the prowler, reason they've become less popular is like large scale strength and conditioning gyms or large scale CrossFit gyms would have all had these 10 years ago. Like every gym I coached in had them, but they become an issue in terms of having a strip of AstroTurf or a strip of Tarmacadam outside where you can do it. And then if you're moving around a dozen people in a class or 15 people in a class, it's difficult to get everyone on the prowler. So it is very much kind of an individual training tool.
So that concludes today's video on the All Blacks. I also think it's quite interesting because that's the S&C coach seems to be the same one we've seen on all of these videos, and I can't think of his name. He introduced himself in one of the videos, but he seems to be operating alone as well. It's a very tricky job to be coaching a room full of elite athletes who all have their own preferences, their own injuries, their own egos in play, their own particular awareness with exercises. There's a lot of work into it, and it's hard to make sure everyone is doing something that's appropriate to their own progressions because they're all individual athletes and they're essentially some of the most valuable rugby players in the world, and ensuring that they don't hurt themselves, but also hopefully if you can do something to improve them, it takes a lot of work. So it is a difficult job. The
cultural pressure of working with the All Blacks, being a Kiwi as well, I could only imagine.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much for watching. As always, we'll be back soon. If you liked the video, please let us know. Please like it, please subscribe, and just if you have questions, put them down in the comments. We'll do our best to get them.